I knew the boy in the third row was going to kill me before the end of the week, and I was the only person in the building who knew it. I had read how this went. The instructor is found at the bottom of the east stairwell. The investigation calls it an accident, and nobody in the story thinks about him again. I was the instructor. The stairwell was 40 feet from where I stood, and the 11 men in front of me, sitting in rows with the blank focus of weapons waiting to be aimed, were the most dangerous alphas in the western half of the country, and one of them had been written to put me down those stairs by the weekend. Then the door at the back of the hall opened, and not one of those 11 lethal men turned around. They had gone still in a way I had never seen, the stillness of animals that have just understood they are not the largest thing in the room. He walked down the center aisle without hurrying. The syndicate's lead enforcer, the one sent to decide whether the new instructor was a liability worth removing. He stopped at the front and looked at me, and the discipline in the room cracked. The boy who was going to kill me swayed in his seat as if the floor had tilted. An alpha 2 rows back closed his eyes and breathed through his mouth. 11 men carved into instruments of total control began very slightly to come apart. And the enforcer, the man who never reacted to anything, turned his head toward me with an expression I can only call the first surprise of his life. Because the thing pulling these men apart was coming from me. I had no idea why, and neither did the book. And the one person in this valley who might know was standing at the front of my classroom, deciding whether to let me live. Before we dive in, let me know in the comments where you are watching from. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy today's story. I should explain how I got here, although explaining it has never made it sound less insane. I died at my desk. That is the short version, and it is also the entire version. I was a cram school teacher, the kind that exists in the cracks of a city, and I was very good at it, and it was killing me slowly, and then one evening it killed me quickly. I was grading practice exams. I remember the red pen. I remember thinking that the boy whose paper I was marking had finally understood comma splices, that I was proud of him, and that I would never tell him because I never told anyone anything kind. And then there was a pressure in my chest, like a hand closing, and the red pen rolled off the desk, and that was the end of the man I used to be. I woke up in a body that was not mine, in a narrow bed in a concrete room with a headache and a name I recognized. The name belonged to a character. I had read this book. Not carefully, not the way you read something you love, but 3 pages a night on a phone held above my face until it dropped on my nose. An omegaverse thriller about a private security syndicate, all blood and bonding and beautiful men making terrible choices. The kind of book I read where no one could catch me, which was nowhere, because no one was ever looking. I had woken up inside one of its minor characters, the instructor, the throwaway, the man hired to teach the syndicate's alpha operatives the soft skills they had skipped on their way to becoming killers, who lasted exactly until the plot needed a body to prove the compound was dangerous, and then provided that body. There is a particular horror in knowing the date of your own death, and not the cause. I knew it was the east stairwell. I knew it was ruled an accident. I did not know who or why or whether it would hurt. The novel had not cared enough to say. So I made a plan, because making plans was the only thing I had ever been good at that did not involve a red pen. I would be boring. I would be useless. I would teach incident report formatting and email subject lines until whatever machinery the plot had set in motion lost interest and ground to a halt. And while it ground, I would collect the new identity this body's predecessor had already half arranged, and I would vanish into the enormous, indifferent country outside and live the small, gray life I had never gotten the first time. It was a good plan. It accounted for everything except the part where my scent apparently functioned as a solvent for the conditioning that held the deadliest men in the building together. I learned the shape of the problem over my first week, in pieces. As you learn you are sick before you learn what you have. The compound sat an hour outside Nagano, up a road the maps did not name, in a valley that held snow the way a cupped hand holds water. It had been a ski lodge once. The syndicate had bought it for the isolation and kept it for the same reason. 40 operatives, a handful of trainers, a logistics staff that kept the food coming, and the questions unasked. And me, the new instructor, replacing the old one who had left, the paperwork said, for personal reasons. The paperwork did not say that the old instructor was me, only weeks before, when a man I had never met fell down a flight of stairs and a man from another world woke up in his bed. The food was bad. I want that on the record. The coffee in particular was a crime, and I drank 3 cups a day, because it was the only thing about the place that felt like home. The trouble was the body, and I had not understood, those first days, how much trouble it was going to be. It was not mine. The man who had lived in it before me had been a real instructor, syndicate vetted, which meant he had known how to stand in a room full of weapons without flinching. And I did not. And the gap between what the body knew and what the mind driving it knew was a thing other people could see before I learned to hide it. I found this out on my first morning, when a door slammed somewhere in the annex and my body dropped into a crouch I had never learned, one hand flat to the wall, weight already on the back foot, and then the mind caught up, did not know what to do with any of it, and I straightened too fast and nearly fell over. A passing operative watched me do it. He did not say anything. He filed it. Every man here did the same. Then there was the demonstration, which I should have seen coming and did not, because I had been so busy planning to be boring that I had forgotten boring instructors still have to prove they are instructors. It happened on the second day. I was meant to be teaching de-escalation, the verbal kind, the kind I was actually good at, when an older operative named Kenji raised his hand and asked, with the polite stone face of a man requesting the salt, whether I would walk them through the disarm. The physical one. The one the previous instructor had taught every intake for years. The one that was, he explained helpfully, the whole reason a soft skills teacher was kept on at a place like this. You could not de-escalate a man who already had your weapon, so first you taught them how not to lose it. 11 faces turned to me with the patient expectation of men who had been promised a thing and intended to collect. I did not know the disarm. I had never held a weapon in my life, my real life, the one with the red pen. But the body had. It had taught this drill 100 times, and I could feel it sitting there under my skin like a language I had forgotten I spoke. And I decided, with the doomed confidence of a man who has concluded that bluffing is cheaper than the truth, to simply let the body do it. So I called Kenji up and told him to come at me slow with the training knife. And I let go of the wheel. For a second and a half it worked. My hands moved on their own, caught his wrist, turned it, and then the mind, the part of me that was a tired teacher who had never once touched another person with violence, panicked at the blade near my own throat and seized up. And the motion the body had begun and the mind refused to finish collided somewhere in the middle. And instead of a clean disarm, I produced a strangled flinch, half a textbook technique and half a man falling down. And Kenji's training knife ended up flat against my collarbone while I stood there holding his wrist with no idea what to do with it. The room went silent. The kind of silence that has a verdict in it. I have been caught out in front of a class before. Every teacher has. The only thing worse than not knowing the answer is letting them watch you sweat about it. So I did the one thing I am genuinely good at, which is talk. Good, I said, releasing his wrist as if I had meant to all along. Did everyone see what just happened? That is what a real disarm looks like when it goes wrong, which is most of the time against a man who knows what he is doing. Anyone can teach you the version that works in a quiet room. I am going to teach you the version where you have already failed and the weapon is at your own throat, and you have half a second to decide what to do about it. That is the only version that has ever saved a life. It was complete nonsense. It was also exactly the kind of nonsense a room full of men who had survived real failure wanted to believe, and I watched it land. And then Kenji did the thing that broke my heart a little. He stepped in close and murmured under his breath, "Your guard dropped on the turn. Keep your elbow in. I will not let them see." And he reset and came at me slow again, and moved his own wrist into the right place so my fumbling looked like control, covering for me for reasons neither of us understood yet. The other alphas closed in after that. Not to expose me, to help. One appointed himself my demonstration partner so he could feed me the motions. Two began correcting each other instead of me, loudly, so the attention stayed off my hands. By the end of the hour, they had taught the disarm to themselves, around me, through me, while preserving the polite fiction that I was the one teaching it. I thought I had gotten lucky. I thought I had talked my way out, as I always talked my way out. I had not. They had caught me. Every one of them had seen exactly what happened, because seeing was what they were built for, and instead of reporting the liability, they had hidden it, because the man who could not do the disarm had already gotten under the conditioning that should have made them turn me in. In the back of the room, in the seat the others left empty out of instinct, the enforcer had watched the whole thing. His name was Renjiro, and I had known it before I ever came up the road, because he was the reason I had read the book at all, back in the life where I had a body that worked and a heart that did not. The quiet one. The syndicate's lead enforcer, the one the author plainly loved more than the protagonist, written to die in the back third of the story with somebody else's name on his lips. Readers had wept over him. I had not, because I had been grading papers, but I had noticed he deserved better than the page he got. And now here he was. In the flesh I had only ever read, watching me fail a drill his men could do in their sleep, with the stillness of a man reading an instrument that should not be giving him this reading. He had seen the body know the drill. He had seen the mind not know it. He had seen the gap, the same one the slammed door had shown that morning, the gap between a man and the life he was supposed to have lived. He had not filed it as the others filed things. He had kept it. I would learn later that he spent that night going back through everything he knew about me, looking for the shape of the lie and finding instead the stranger shape of a truth he had no name for. A man who flinched at the wrong things, who knew a hallway he had never been shown, whose hands remembered a violence the rest of him recoiled from. He did not know the word transmigration. There was no reason he would, but he knew, as he knew everything, by watching, that the instructor who had come up the road was not the instructor the body belonged to, and that whatever had happened to put a stranger behind those eyes was the same thing that was quietly taking his men apart. The first sign that the men were coming apart came that same second day, in the back half of that same class, though I did not connect it to the demonstration at the time. We had moved on from the disarm, and I was back on the verbal material, the part I could actually teach, when a young alpha in the front row raised his hand and asked with total sincerity whether I would consider letting him carry my books to my next class. I did not have books. I had a tablet. I told him this. He offered to carry the tablet. I said no, and he looked so wounded that the alpha next to him put a hand on his shoulder, and I moved on, and I filed it under the general strangeness of teaching men who had been raised in a box. But that night, going over the day in my narrow bed, I remembered that this particular alpha was, in the novel, a stone-cold professional who never spoke an unnecessary word, and that the author had used him exactly twice, both times to kill someone efficiently and walk away. The second sign was Haruki. Haruki was the boy in the third row. Haruki was the one who was going to kill me, except that by the third day Haruki had started saving me a seat in the cafeteria. I want to be clear that I did not ask him to. I came in for my terrible coffee on the third morning, and there he was at the end of a long table, and he had put his jacket over the chair beside him, and when he saw me, he removed the jacket with the speed of a man defusing something, and he looked at me, and he looked at the chair, and he did not say a word, because saying words was apparently beyond him, and I understood that the chair was for me, and that refusing it would break something in him that the syndicate had spent years building. I sat in the chair. He vibrated with quiet joy for the entire meal and did not eat. "You should eat," I told him. "I will," he said, and did not. In the novel, Haruki, whose name I only knew because I had read ahead, was the trainee scripted to defect. He was going to betray the syndicate in the back half of the book for reasons the author treated as tragic and I treated as a plot device. He was dangerous and damaged and doomed. He was also, apparently, 26 years old and incapable of eating in front of a man whose chalk and mint scent had, without my knowledge or consent, walked into his conditioning and turned off a light. That was how I started to understand it. Not all at once. In the cafeteria, over coffee that tasted like betrayal, watching a scripted killer fail to eat a sandwich because I had sat next to him. Whatever I carried in this body, these men were not built to withstand it. I did not know what it was. The novel had not told me, and the one person who might have known was the one assigned to decide whether I should be allowed to keep breathing. Renjiro did not save me a seat. Renjiro did not carry my tablet. Renjiro watched. He was always at the edge of things. In the back of the lecture hall, in the doorway of the cafeteria, in the cold blue light of the corridor when I left the annex at night. He never spoke to me after that first continue. He never needed to. He simply occupied the periphery of my days like a fact, like weather, like the snow on the road that I checked every morning to see how much time I had left before the valley sealed. I told myself he was deciding how to kill me. The novel supported this. The instructor was a liability, and Renjiro removed liabilities, and the east stairwell was right there, and a man who watches you is a man taking measurements. I was wrong about why he watched. I would not learn how wrong for some time, and learning it would cost me more than the watching ever did. The thing you have to understand about being useful to people and loved by none of them is that you stop being able to tell the difference between the two. Someone needs you, and you call it being wanted. Someone relies on you, and you call it being close. I had done this my whole first life. I had graded 10,000 papers for children who forgot my name the day they passed their exams, and I had told myself that the forgetting was fine, was natural, was the shape of the job, and I had gone home alone every night to an apartment that held nothing of me, and I had called it peace. So when the men of the compound began to orbit me, I did not understand it as affection because I did not have a slot for affection. I understood it as need. They needed something I had. I would give it to them until I left, and then they would forget me. And I called that peace. And I was lying. And a man in a dark coat at the edge of every room could see the lie better than I could. By the end of the first week, the orbit had a pattern, and the pattern was absurd. There was Haruki, who saved me seats and did not eat. There was the front row alpha, Makoto, who had appointed himself keeper of my schedule and appeared at my door each morning with the weather, the meals, and a threat assessment that consisted entirely of him having decided everyone who looked at me too long was a threat. There was a pair of twins the syndicate used for jobs requiring two identical men, who competed silently and viciously over which of them would refill my coffee so that my cup was never empty and I was perpetually over-caffeinated. There was Kenji, who had covered for me in the demonstration and now decided I needed protecting from the cold, leaving folded blankets outside my door like a cat leaving birds. None of them touched me. That was the careful center of it. They arranged themselves around me with the desperate precision of men who knew that whatever they felt was forbidden was a malfunction in equipment that was not supposed to malfunction, and they expressed it in the only currency they had, which was service, blankets, coffee, saved chairs. They could not say one warm word, so they brought me things and watched my face when I accepted, and I accepted, because refusing felt like kicking something that had crawled to me on its belly. It would have been funny if I had not known what they were. It was funny anyway. I have always laughed at the wrong things. A man brought me a fourth cup of coffee I did not want and looked at me like I had handed him a future, and I thought, distantly, that I was going to die in a building full of the most dangerous men alive, and they were going to fight over who got to bring me the blanket. In the doorway, every time, Renjiro watched the orbit turn, and his jaw tightened, and I told myself it was disapproval. A man assessing a problem that was getting worse. It was not disapproval, though it would take me too long to understand that. The first time he spoke to me, really spoke, it was because Haruki put his hand on my arm. It was nothing. We were in the cafeteria, and Haruki had finally, after 4 days, eaten an actual meal in my presence. And he was so proud of himself that when I stood to leave, he reached out and caught my sleeve, just to slow me, just to keep the moment a second longer, and his fingers closed on my forearm. The reaction went through the room like a current. Makoto was on his feet. The twins had stopped mid-pour. Kenji's chair scraped back. And before I had finished registering that something had shifted, Renjiro was there, between Haruki and me, and he had not appeared to move quickly, but he was simply there, and his hand was around Haruki's wrist, and Haruki had gone white. "Off," Renjiro said. Haruki's hand opened. He pulled it back as if from a stove. He was breathing hard, and his eyes had gone glassy, and I realized that whatever my scent did to these men, touching me made it worse. Much worse. And that Haruki had just done by accident what the rest of them had spent a week not allowing themselves to do. Renjiro did not look at Haruki. He looked at me, and for the first time I saw his face up close, and caught his scent under the chaos of the room, gun oil gone cold and wet slate and something sweet beneath it, like sugar left too long over a flame. It was not the blank instrument I had taken it for. There was something working behind the face, something held down hard, the way you hold a door against a wind. "You should not let them touch you," he said. His voice was low and even, and it did not match his eyes at all. I didn't let him. He grabbed me. "Then you should not be where they can grab you." "I teach a class. They're in the class. The math is difficult." I watched it land. I watched the smallest thing happen at the corner of his mouth, gone before it finished, a thing that on another man would have been the beginning of a smile. And on him was an event of geological rarity. He had not expected me to be funny. People rarely do. It is the one weapon I have that nobody sees coming. "Come with me," he said. "Am I in trouble?" "You are a problem," he said, which was not an answer, and turned and walked out of the cafeteria, clearly expecting me to follow, and I looked at the 4 alphas who were watching me go with the wounded eyes of dogs left behind, and I followed, because a problem is a thing you can solve, and a solved problem might get to live. To Chapter 4. He took me to an office that was not his. I could tell it was not his because it had things in it. A desk, a chair, a window looking out at the white throat of the valley. Renjiro stood in the middle of it like a man visiting a country he did not like. "What are you?" he said. "An instructor." "You are not an instructor. I have watched instructors. They teach. You hide." He let that sit. "And your hands know the disarm. I watched them do it on the second day, clean, the first half of it, better than anything I could teach. Then you stopped, as if you had never seen the motion in your life. A man does not forget a thing his hands remember, unless the hands and the man are not the same age, or not the same man. So he had seen that too. I filed it, as I filed everything, and I gave him the answer I had prepared for exactly this conversation, the boring, true-enough answer that explained nothing dangerous. "I'm new," I said. "I'm careful. I keep my head down. That's not hiding. That's surviving a job where the students could kill me by accident." "They will not kill you by accident. That's reassuring. It is not meant to be." He looked at me, and the held-down thing behind his face shifted again. "Something is wrong with them. Since you came." Makoto does not sleep. The Mori brothers have stopped reporting each other, which they have done every day for 6 years. Haruki touched you in a public room without permission, which 2 weeks ago he would have removed his own hand before doing. He paused. And he stopped. He did not finish the sentence. I have thought about that unfinished sentence more than almost anything else in either of my lives, because it was the first time I understood that whatever was happening to the men of the compound was happening to him too, and that he had walked me into a borrowed office not to threaten me, but because he needed a room where the others could not see him not finish that sentence. And you, I said carefully, are the one who decides if I'm a liability. Something flickered. You know that. I'm careful, I said again. I told you. I notice things. What did you notice about me? That you are going to die, I did not say. That the author loved you and killed you anyway, in someone else's arms for someone else's story, and that I have been trying very hard not to look directly at you because you are the saddest thing in a book full of sad things, and I do not have room in my survival plan for sad things. That you watch, I said. That you don't touch. That you keep the others off me. That whatever you've decided about whether I'm a liability, you haven't done anything about it yet, which means either you haven't decided or you've decided no, or you've decided yes, and you're waiting. I held his eyes. I notice things. It's the only reason I'm still standing here. The silence went on a long time. Snow ticked against the window. Somewhere in the building, 40 dangerous men were doing whatever dangerous men do when the one thing that has started to unravel them is in a room they cannot enter. I have not decided, Renjiro said at last. That is the truth. I am supposed to have decided. The director asked me a week ago and I told him I needed more time, which I have never said in 11 years. He looked at the window, at the snow, at the valley filling up like a grave. I do not know what you are, but I know that since you arrived for the first time since I was a boy, I have wanted something, and I was built so that I would not. I should have said something careful. I should have deflected with logistics, as I always do, as I had survived every dangerous moment of both my lives. Instead, I heard myself say the truest thing I had said since I died. That sounds awful. He turned and looked at me, and the door he had been holding against the wind came open just a crack, and what was behind it was not a weapon, and was not a killer, and was not the blank instrument the novel had described. It was a man who had been told his whole life that he was a tool with a date stamped on the bottom, hearing someone say, out loud, that wanting things was awful, and agreeing. Yes, he said. It is. And that was the moment I made my first real mistake, the mistake that broke my plan and the book, and eventually nearly broke me. I let myself like him. Just a little, just a crack. I told myself it cost nothing, that I was leaving, that he was fictional, that he was already dead 200 pages from now in a story I knew the ending of. I told myself I could like a dead man safely, the way you can love a photograph. I have never been good at math when it mattered. The days after that were the closest thing to peace I have ever had, which should have been the warning, because peace in my life has always been the flat water before the thing under it surfaces. The orbit continued. The blankets accumulated. I had, by the second week, enough folded blankets outside my door each morning to open a small shop, and I had started leaving them in the corridor for Kenji to take back, and Kenji had started taking it as a sign that I wanted nicer blankets, and the quality of the blankets had begun to escalate alarmingly. Makoto delivered his threat assessments. The Mori twins fought their silent coffee war. Haruki ate now when I sat with him, watching me from under his hair with an expression of such open devotion that I had to keep my eyes on my tray. Renjiro stopped standing in doorways and started sitting in my classroom. He did it without announcement, as he did everything. One morning he was simply in the back row, in the seat the killers left empty out of instinct, and he stayed for the whole of my deliberately tedious lesson on the proper escalation of a maintenance request. And at the end he stood and left without a word, and the next morning he was there again. I knew what he was doing. He was the man assigned to evaluate me, and he was evaluating me, and I told myself that was all it was, and I taught my boring lessons to a room of lethal men, and one enforcer who could have killed every one of us before we finished standing up, and I made my jokes, the small dry ones I cannot stop making, and twice, only twice, I saw the corner of his mouth move. The second time, I stopped mid-sentence. I had not meant to. I had made a joke about the maintenance request form, about how the syndicate had a form for requesting a new light bulb, but no form for requesting a new life. And it was not even a good joke. It was tired. It was the kind of thing I said when my mouth ran ahead of my caution. And Renjiro, in the back row, smiled. It was not a large smile. It was barely a smile at all. But it changed his entire face, the way the first real light changes a room you thought you knew, and I forgot the rest of my sentence. And 11 alphas turned to see what had stopped their instructor, and I had to invent a coughing fit to cover it, and the Mori twins both lunged to bring me water. That night, I lay in my narrow bed and did the thing I had promised myself I would not do, which was think about him as a person instead of a problem. I thought about a boy raised to understand himself as a thing with a purpose and an expiration. I thought about 11 years of never saying he needed more time. I thought about a man who showed feeling only through logistics, who protected without announcing it, who had stood between me and Haruki's hand not because it was his job, but because something in him could not do otherwise, and who had then walked me to a borrowed office to admit, to the one person who could not use it against him, that wanting things was new and awful and his. And then the other thing, the thing I kept circling back to, he dies. In the book, he dies. Back third, someone else's arms, someone else's name. The author is going to take this man who has just learned to want and have him die wanting the wrong thing for the wrong person. And there is nothing I can do about it, because I am the throwaway who dies in Chapter 3, and Chapter 3 is almost over, and the snow is almost across the road. I should have been planning my exit. The handler had told me the papers would be ready by the end of the month, and the end of the month was close. And the smart thing, the surviving thing, the thing the old me would have done before the question finished forming, was to take the papers the moment they came and walk the access road before the valley sealed, and never think about this place, or these men, or that almost smile again. Instead, I lay awake and tried to remember the chapter. The death chapter. His, not mine. I had read it on a phone held above my face, half asleep, 3 pages a night, and I had not been paying attention because I never paid attention to anything that did not need grading, and now I needed it. Now I would have given a year of my borrowed life to remember exactly how and when and where the enforcer was supposed to die, and I could not. I could remember mine. The east stairwell. An accident. Soon. His I could not remember at all, only that it came later and that it was sad, and that the readers had cried. The papers came early. That was the first thing that went wrong, and it went wrong in the shape of a kindness, which is the cruelest way for things to go wrong. Sato found me after my last class. He was the logistics handler, a beta in his 40s with the gray, careful face of a man who had been keeping other people's secrets so long he had forgotten which ones were his. He had processed my arrival. He was in the novel a footnote, a name on a duty roster, a man who appeared once to hand the protagonist a key and was never mentioned again. In life, he was the only person in the compound who treated me like a colleague instead of a phenomenon, and I had come, without noticing, to like him. "Walk with me," he said, and we walked out into the cold, past the annex to the edge of the lot where the snow had been pushed into gray mountains, and the access road ran down into the white. He handed me an envelope. It was thin. It did not look like a new life. New lives never do. "It's all there," he said. "Identity, history, a bank account with enough to start. The road's still open. If you go in the next few days, you'll make it down before it closes." He looked at me with those gray, careful eyes. "You should go, in the next few days. You're very eager to be rid of me." "I'm not." He said it flatly, and it was true. And that was what made it land. "I like you. That's the problem. I've watched this place for 19 years, and I've watched a lot of people come up that road, and I have never once watched the whole compound rearrange itself around one of them the way it's rearranged itself around you." He paused. "I planned to leave too, when I came. 19 years ago, I had an envelope just like that one. I kept finding reasons to stay one more month, and then I looked up and I was almost 50 and this is my life, and the road might as well be closed for good because I'm never going down it now. He pressed the envelope into my hands. Don't be me. Go while going is still a thing you can do. I looked at the envelope. I looked at the road. I thought about the small gray life waiting at the bottom of it, the life I had wanted, the life where no one needed me and so no one could forget me, because you cannot be forgotten by people who never knew you were there. And I thought about a man in the back row of my classroom who had smiled at a joke about light bulbs. How much time do I have? I asked. Really? Sato looked up at the sky where the clouds were doing the low gray thing that meant snow was coming. More snow, the kind that closes valleys. Days, he said, not weeks. The next big storm shuts the road until spring. And it's coming. He hesitated. There's something else. Something I shouldn't tell you. Then tell me. The director's coming up. End of the week ahead of the storm. He watched my face. He asked for the evaluation. The one Renjiro's supposed to have finished by now. On you. Whether you're a liability? His voice dropped. I've seen what happens when the director decides someone's a liability and the road's about to close. It's tidy. It's always tidy. And it always happens on the stairs. The east stairwell. An accident. The investigation concluded. The chapter I knew. The death I knew was mine. It was not a vague future anymore. It had a date now, the end of the week and a cause, the director and a method, the stairs, and the only thing standing between me and the bottom of that stairwell was an enforcer who had not finished my evaluation. Because, for the first time in 11 years, he had wanted something and been afraid to say what. I put the envelope in my coat and I told Sato thank you, and I meant it, and I walked back toward the annex through the gathering cold, and I did not go to the road, because somewhere in the last 2 weeks, without permission, without sense, against every law of survival I had ever written for myself, I had stopped being a man who only knew how to leave. That night, Renjiro was waiting outside my door. No blanket, no coffee, just him. In the cold blue light of the corridor, with an expression I had not seen on him before, the held-down door no longer merely cracked, but visibly straining. The director is coming, he said. I heard. He will ask me for my decision. Renjiro's hands were at his sides, and his fingers had curled, as they had in the novel's description of him. The only tell he had, the thing his body did when the rest of him would not. I have to give him one. And what is it? I asked. Your decision. Am I a liability? He looked at me for a long time in that cold blue light, in that building full of sleeping weapons, in that valley about to seal for the winter, and when he answered, his voice was not even and was not low, and did not match anything about the man the novel had described. Yes, he said. You are the most dangerous thing that has ever come up that road. He took a breath, and the door behind his face came open all the way, and I saw what was behind it, finally, completely, and it was not a weapon. And I am not going to let anyone touch you. The snow started falling while he said it. I could see it past his shoulder, through the window at the end of the corridor, the first heavy flakes of the storm that was going to close the road, and I understood 3 things at once. I understood that my plan was dead. I understood that the chapter I knew was no longer the chapter I was in. And I understood, with the particular terror of a man who has spent 2 lifetimes making sure of exactly the opposite, that I was no longer a person who could be safely forgotten, because the deadliest man in the building had just decided, out loud, in the dark, that I was the one thing he would ever protect. By morning the road would be closed, and the director was coming. The snow sealed the valley in the night, exactly as Sato had said it would, and I woke to a white silence so total that for one disoriented second I thought I had died again, and this time landed somewhere quiet. I had not died. I had only been sealed in with 40 dangerous men, an enforcer who had decided to protect me, and a director arriving ahead of a storm to confirm that I was a liability and arrange for me to fall down some stairs. The envelope with my new life was still in my coat. The road it required was under 4 feet of snow. I had chosen, without quite admitting I was choosing, to stay one day too long, and the valley had made the choice permanent. Renjiro found me at the window, watching the white. "You did not take the road," he said. "The road took itself. You had time. Sato told you. You chose to stay." He said it without accusation, like a man reading a result off an instrument. Why? I could have lied. I am very good at lying with logistics, at bearing a feeling under a schedule. Instead, I kept watching the snow because it was easier than watching him, and I told him a piece of the truth, which is the most I have ever been able to manage. "Because somebody in this building smiled at a joke about light bulbs," I said, and I wanted to see if I could make him do it again. He was quiet for a while. Then he said, "That is a foolish reason to risk your life," and his voice did the thing it was not built to do, and I understood that I had made him do it again. Not the smile. The other thing. The thing underneath the smile. And that it had cost him something to let me hear it. The director arrived that afternoon by snowmobile, because the man did not allow weather to inconvenience him any more than he allowed people to. I watched the machines come up the buried road from my classroom window, 3 of them, black against the white, and I felt the building change around me, the orbit of devoted alphas pulling tight and quiet, the way a household goes silent when a feared parent comes home. I had built my whole plan around being beneath notice. I understood now that the plan had failed at the most basic level because the most dangerous man in the story was about to notice me very much, and the man who was supposed to evaluate me had instead decided to defend me, and there is no version of those 2 facts that ends with me being forgotten. The director sent for me before dinner. He had taken the grand room, the one with the fireplace too large for the building, the last bone of the ski lodge the syndicate had not buried in concrete. He sat in front of the fire in a chair that was almost a throne, and he was not what I expected, because I had expected a monster and instead got a pleasant-looking man in his 50s with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead and the warm, attentive manner of a doctor about to give you bad news kindly. Renjiro stood at his shoulder. That was the arrangement. The enforcer stood where the director could see his hands. "So, you're the instructor," the director said. "Sit, please. You've caused quite a stir." I sat. I did not say anything. I have learned that the man holding the power will always fill a silence, and what he fills it with tells you everything. "I've run this organization for a long time," he went on, folding his hands. "I've learned to pay attention when the instruments start behaving strangely. And my instruments have been behaving very strangely since you came up that road." He smiled. It was a good smile. It had been practiced on frightened people for 30 years. Makoto hasn't slept. The Mori brothers have stopped informing on each other. And my best enforcer, who has never in 11 years failed to complete an evaluation on schedule, has told me twice now that he needs more time. About you. He tilted his head. A teacher of incident reports. Tell me, what are you, really? There it was, the novel's machinery, turning. The liability assessment, the tidy decision, the stairs. I felt the shape of my scripted death close around the room, and I understood that the honest answer, the transmigration, the foreknowledge, the solvent sent, would not save me, would only confirm that I was an asset too valuable and too dangerous to leave walking around. The truth would get me studied. A lie would get me killed. I needed a third thing, so I gave him the only weapon I have ever owned. I told him something true in a tone that made it sound like nothing. I'm a man who notices things, I said. It's a boring talent. It doesn't compel anyone. It doesn't unravel your instruments. I think you've got a building full of men who were raised in a box and never taught what to do when someone treats them like people, and I treat everyone like people because I used to teach children, and children can smell condescension from across a room. That's all I am. I'm the first person in this compound who said good morning to your weapons and meant it. That's not a superpower. That's just sad. I watched it work, partly. The director was too smart to be fully fooled, but he was also a man who preferred the explanation that did not require him to believe in something he could not measure. And "the men are starved for basic dignity" was an explanation he could file. I saw him decide to half believe it. I saw him decide it did not matter whether he believed it, because the calculation was the same either way. "That may be true," he said pleasantly. "But true or not, you're a destabilizing influence on a $40 million operation. And the road is closed, and I have a simple rule about destabilizing influences." He picked up his reading glasses, unfolded them, set them down again. A man tidying his desk before a small chore. "Renjiro will see you back to your room. We'll talk again in the morning." There it was. The morning. The stairs were between the grand room and my room. I knew the chapter. I had always known the chapter. I stood, and my legs were steadier than they had any right to be, and I looked at the director's pleasant face, and I thought, with the strange clarity that comes when the thing you have feared finally arrives on schedule, that the worst part of dying the first time had been that no one was there, and that this time, at least, someone would be on the stairs with me. I did not yet understand what Renjiro intended to do about that. He walked me out. The corridor was cold and blue and empty, and the building held its breath, and we came to the top of the east stairwell, the one I had measured on my first day, 40 feet from where I taught. The place, the investigation would conclude, was an accident. There were 2 men at the bottom. I had not seen them before. They were not part of the orbit. They had the still, patient stance of men waiting to do a job, and the job was waiting on the stairs, exactly as Sato had told me it always did. I stopped. Renjiro stopped beside me. I felt him understand the stairwell the same instant I did, felt the held-down door behind his face come open all the way and stay open. And when he spoke, his voice was very quiet and very calm, and I have never been so frightened of anything. "Go back to the grand room," he told the 2 men. "This is not happening tonight." "Director's orders," one of them said. "I am giving you new ones." "You do not have the authority to countermand." He did not let the man finish. "I will not describe what happened on those stairs, because I did not fully see it, and because the part I did see, I have tried to forget. It was fast, and it was total, and it was the work of a man who had been built for exactly one purpose, and had spent 11 years refusing to enjoy it. When it was over, the 2 men were down. Not dead, I learned later, but down. And Renjiro was standing between me and the bottom of the stairwell with blood on his hands that was not his. And the novel's chapter, the one I had carried in my chest like a stone since the day I woke up, did not happen. I did not fall. The accident was not concluded. The stairwell was just a stairwell, and I was alive at the top of it, and the man who was scripted to die for someone else in the back third of the book had just torn up my death scene with his bare hands. "You should not have done that," I said, and my voice was not steady at all. "I know. He'll kill you for it." "I know that too." He looked at his hands, at the blood with the mild detachment of a man examining a tool that had performed as expected. Then he looked at me and the detachment was gone. "I was made to die protecting someone. I have always known that. I made my peace with it when I was a boy." He took a breath. "I only ever wanted to choose who." The midpoint of every story is supposed to be a reward before the fall. This was mine. Not a kiss. Not a confession dressed in pretty words. A man with someone else's blood on his hands telling me, in a cold stairwell, that the one freedom he had ever wanted was the freedom to choose who he died for, and that he had chosen me. I should have been planning. The director was a wall away. The road was closed. 2 men were down at the bottom of the stairs and more would come. The smart thing, the surviving thing, was to think. Instead, I reached out and I took his bloody hand in both of mine, and I held it, because he had spent 2 weeks bringing me nothing, because he was the only one disciplined enough not to, and because no one had ever once in either of my lives put their body between me and the thing that was going to end me, and because I did not have a single logistical sentence left in me. His hand turned in mine and held on. And in the cold of that stairwell, his scent and mine reached each other for the first time without anything between them. No discipline, no suppressant, no held door, and they became something neither of them was alone. Not slate and not chalk. Something like the inside of a struck match in the instant before it catches. Sharp and warm and one breath from fire. We stood there holding hands over the bodies of 2 men he had put down to keep me whole, and I thought, this is the worst possible time. And I thought, I have never wanted anything this much, and I understood that the book was well and truly broken now, and that I had broken it, and that I had no idea what came next because there was no next. The pages I knew were gone, and we were writing on a blank one in the dark. We did not sleep that night. There was no point. Renjiro moved me to a room with one door and no stairwell near it, and he sat against that door with the patient stillness I had once mistaken for indifference, and I sat on the bed, and we waited for the building to decide what it was. I changed the dressing on his arm near dawn. He had been cut in the stairwell, a long, shallow line down his forearm that he had not mentioned, because mentioning his own injuries was not in him, and I found it when the blood came through his sleeve, and I made him sit on the bed and roll it up, and I cleaned it with what Kenji's blanket pile had improbably yielded in the way of a first aid kit. My hands were not steady. I want that recorded too. I have steady hands. I graded 10,000 papers with a red pen that never wavered, but I knelt in front of this man and pressed a cloth to the place where he had bled, keeping me alive, and my hands shook, and he watched me the entire time without a word, and the not speaking was louder than anything he could have said. "You're staring," I told him. "Yes." "Why?" He considered it with the seriousness he gave everything. "I was told what I was when I was very young," he said. "A tool. A thing with a use and an end." I believed it. It was easier than the alternative. He turned his arm slightly under my hands, watching me work. "No one has ever knelt down in front of me. I am trying to understand what it means. It means you're bleeding, and I have a first aid kit." "No," he said. "It does not." He was right, and I knew it, and I taped the dressing down and did not let go of his arm. And we stayed like that in the gray dawn light, an Omega who had decided to matter to no one, with his hands on an Alpha who had been told he was no one. And neither of us said the thing, because the thing was too large for the room. But it was there, taped down under the dressing, holding. The director did not send for me in the morning. That was worse than if he had. He sent for Renjiro. I learned what happened in that room later, in pieces, as I learn everything. The director did not shout. Men like the director do not need to. He simply laid out the arithmetic, calmly, over the too large fire, the arithmetic of a man who owned people and understood exactly what they cost. He told Renjiro that the instructor was a contagion, that whatever the man was, dignity or chemistry or a flaw in the design, he had unraveled 6 of the men and the enforcer himself, and that an unraveled enforcer was worse than a dead one. He told Renjiro that there were 2 ways forward. The first was that Renjiro request immediate reassignment, sever every connection to the instructor, and let the organization handle the destabilizing influence in the tidy way it handled such things after the storm, when the road opened. The second way the director did not describe, because he did not have to, because the second way ended with both of us at the bottom of stairwells, and Renjiro had already shown what he would do to the men sent to arrange it. Then the director said the thing he knew would work, because he had spent 30 years learning which lever moved which man. He told Renjiro that the only way to keep the instructor alive was to stop wanting him, that as long as the enforcer was compromised, the instructor was a problem to be solved. But a man the enforcer had publicly, completely renounced, a man Renjiro looked the director in the eye and called nothing, was a man not worth the trouble of killing. "Discard him yourself," the director said, "and I will let him walk down the road in spring. Keep him, and I will bury you both under it." I know now that Renjiro spent the entire day in that calculation. I know he ran it as he ran everything, cold and complete, looking for the exit, and that there was no exit, that the man who owned him had built the trap out of the one thing Renjiro could not refuse, which was my survival. I know all of that now. I did not know it then. Then, I only knew that Renjiro came to find me in the late afternoon, and that his face had closed, the held-down door shut, barred, bricked over, gone, and that when he spoke, he used a voice I had never heard from him, flat and final and addressed to a point just past my shoulder. "I have requested reassignment," he said, "effective when the road opens." I did not understand at first. Reassignment where? Away. It does not matter where. His eyes did not meet mine. I told the director the truth, that I lost my discipline, that you are a flaw in the men's conditioning and nothing more, that whatever he saw between us was a malfunction, and that I have corrected it. He paused, and his voice did not change, did not crack, did not give me one single thing to hold. "You are nothing to me. You were a problem I let get too close. That is finished now. I have spent my whole life telling people I am nothing to them. I said it to children who outgrew me. I said it to a first life that used me up and never learned my name. I said it to these men, these poor, unraveled men, every time they brought me a blanket. This is not love. You do not know me. I am leaving. I am no one to you. I built my entire survival out of saying it first so that no one could say it to me and have it land. It turns out it lands anyway when the right person says it. It turns out all my practice was in saying the words, and none of it, not 1 hour of it, was in hearing them. And Renjiro said them in a flat, closed voice to a point past my shoulder, and the floor of 2 lifetimes opened up under me, and I learned in a single sentence that I had been lying to myself for 29 years, and a death. I mattered to no one. I had made sure of it. It had been the whole plan. And now, the one man I had let close enough to break the plan was standing in front of me calling me nothing. And I discovered, far too late to do anything useful about it, that I had wanted to matter to him more than I had ever wanted anything, including the small, gray, safe, forgettable life at the bottom of the road. "Okay," I said, "because what else is there?" "Okay." And he left, and he did not look back. And I sat in the room with one door and no stairwell, and understood that he had done it to save me, and that understanding it did not help at all, because the body does not care about your reasons. The body only knows it has been set down and walked away from. The body had been waiting 29 years, and a death to be picked up. And for a short while it had been ending in a stairwell with blood on someone's hands, and now it had been set down again, and it did not care why. The days that followed were the longest of either life. The storm settled over the valley and did not move. Snow against the windows, snow on the buried road, snow in the silence where Renjiro used to stand. He kept his word with a completeness that was its own kind of violence. He did not sit in my classroom. He did not stand in doorways. When we passed in the cold blue corridors, he looked through me as if I were a window, and I looked through him, and we were both very good at it, because we had both been trained in different schools to disappear, the things we could not afford to feel. The orbit broke, too. That was the part I had not expected and could not bear. With Renjiro publicly turned against me, the others understood, as dogs understand a shift in the pack, that the instructor was no longer safe to love, and one by one they pulled back. Makoto stopped delivering his threat assessments. The Mori twins let my coffee cup run empty. Kenji's blankets stopped appearing outside my door, and I missed them. I missed the absurd escalating blankets with an intensity that frightened me, because they had been, I understood now, the only uncomplicated kindness I had let myself accept in 2 lifetimes. Only Haruki held on, and only barely, and only because Haruki had never had enough discipline to let go of anything. He still sat near me in the cafeteria, one chair further away than before, watching me with the wretched confusion of a young man who could feel that something had been taken and did not have the words to ask who took it. I made myself talk to him. It was the one thing I could still do, the thing I had always been able to do: take a damaged young person and give them 10 minutes of being treated like they mattered. I owed him that. He had saved me a chair when no one else would. "You should eat," I told him in the cold cafeteria over the terrible coffee. "You always say that. You never do it." He looked at me, and his eyes were too old for his face, as they get in people the world started using too early. "He didn't mean it," Haruki said. "What he said to you. I don't know what he said, but I know he didn't mean it. I've watched him for 3 years. He's never wanted anything. And then you came and he wanted something. I could smell it. We all could. And now he's pretending he doesn't. And the pretending smells like a man holding his breath." He pushed his untouched tray toward me, an offering. "Whatever he did it for a reason. He always has a reason. He just never tells anyone what it is, because nobody ever asked him." Out of the mouths of scripted killers. I looked at this boy, this doomed defector, this throwaway the author had loved and wasted, and I thought about a man who had never been asked his reasons, and I thought, for the first time since the corridor, instead of only feeling, he had called me nothing. He had done it the day after he tore up my death scene with his bare hands. A man does not bleed for you one night and renounce you the next because his feelings changed in his sleep. Renjiro did nothing without a reason, and he never told anyone the reason, because no one had ever asked, because he had been raised as a tool, and tools are not asked why. I had been so busy being the one who was left that I had not once asked why I was being left. So I asked. It took me 2 days to get him alone, 2 days of the storm and the silence and the broken orbit. And I finally caught him in the equipment room near the annex, alone, checking gear with the methodical calm of a man who handles his hands when the rest of him is in trouble. He looked up when I came in, and his face did the close thing. And I shut the door behind me, and I did not deflect with logistics, and I did not say something dry, and I did not make it easy for either of us. "Why?" I said. "Not what. I know what you said. Why you said it. And don't tell me you stopped wanting something, because the only person in this building who believes that is the director, and he believes it because he needs to, and you're smarter than him, so don't insult us both." He went very still, the patient stillness, and for a moment I thought he would look through me again. Then his hand stopped moving on the gear, and the door behind his face moved, just barely, just a crack. "He gave me 2 ways to keep you alive," he said. "One of them was to stop being the reason you are in danger. As long as I want you, you are a problem he has to erase. If I do not want you, you are only an inconvenience he can afford to release in spring." His hands closed on the edge of the table. I did the arithmetic 100 times. There is no other answer. The only way to keep you breathing was to make myself stop mattering to your survival. So I made myself nothing to you, out loud, where he could hear it, because that is the only language he trusts. He finally looked at me, and the crack in the door was the whole man now. The want he had been ordered to kill, still alive, terrible, his. "I did not stop wanting you. I cannot. I was built to want one thing, and I went my whole life without finding it, and then you came up the road and I found it, and I would rather lie to your face every day until spring than bury you under it. That is the why, you asked." The director had built the trap perfectly. I could see it now, the whole cold, elegant shape of it. He had taken the one man who would die for me and used my life as the lever to make him leave me, and either way the director won. Because a Renjiro who kept me was a Renjiro who got us both killed, and a Renjiro who left me was a Renjiro broken back into a tool. There was no exit. Renjiro had run it over, and there was no exit because he had been looking for an exit that kept us both alive and free, and that exit did not exist. But I am not an enforcer, I am a teacher. And teachers do not look for the exit. Teachers look for the thing the student got wrong on the way to the answer, the small false assumption, 3 steps back that made the whole problem unsolvable. Renjiro had assumed he had to stay alive. "You ran the wrong problem," I told him. My voice was steady now. "It comes back when I have something to do. You ran. How do I keep him alive and free and stay alive myself?" That one has no answer. The director made sure of it. I stepped closer. "But you already told me the answer in the stairwell. You said you were made to die protecting someone and you only ever wanted to choose who. You don't need to keep yourself alive. You need to make me not worth killing, and there's only one way a tool stops being worth anything to the man who owns it." I held his eyes. "It stops being a tool he owns." He understood. He was always faster than the novel gave him credit for. The closed door was fully open now, and behind it was want and something sharper still. Something I had put there. "You are talking about the director," he said slowly. "I'm talking about the only confrontation in this building that respects the math. I can't confront him. I'm a teacher of incident reports. I have no power here. If I walk into that grand room and make a speech, he'll have me on the stairs before I finish the first sentence, and it'll be tidy and the investigation will conclude. That's not my scene. I know exactly what my scene is. I read the book." I took a breath. "But you're his enforcer, his son in everything but blood, the one weapon he could never replace. You're the only person in this valley with the standing to walk into that room. Power talks to power. You told me that with your whole life without saying a word." I put my hand flat on his chest, over the place where the burnt sugar sweetness lived under the cold slate. "Stop trying to die for me quietly. Go take away the thing he owns. Out loud, where he can hear it. It's the only language he trusts." His hand came up and covered mine on his chest, and his scent and mine reached for each other again, struck match, one breath from fire, and for the first time since the corridor, the door was not open now, but gone, dismantled, and the man behind it looked at me like I had handed him the one thing 11 years of conditioning had taught him he was not allowed to have, which was a way to choose. "If I do this," he said, "I lose everything I have ever been. The organization, my place in it, the only purpose I was ever given. I will be nothing the director made. I do not know what is left of me underneath that. No one has ever seen it, including me. I'll see it," I said. "I'm a teacher. Seeing the part of someone nobody else bothered to look at is the entire job. And then, because I cannot help myself, because my mouth runs ahead of my caution when it matters most. Also, you're terrible at incident reports and you're going to need a teacher anyway, so." And Renjiro, the syndicate's lead enforcer, the man written to die in someone else's arms for someone else's story, the man who had not smiled in 11 years until a tired teacher made a joke about light bulbs, laughed. It was a small laugh. It was barely a laugh at all, but it changed his entire face, and it was the second to last thing I needed to know before everything that came after, because a man who can laugh in the equipment room of a building that wants him dead is a man who has already decided to live. Before he went, he did something I had not seen him do, something that was not protection and was not logistics and had no use I could name. He took off his coat, the dark one he wore like a second skin, and he put it around my shoulders. The equipment room was not cold. We both knew it was not cold. He did it anyway, slowly, settling it, his hands lingering at the collar a moment longer than the task required. A man practicing a gesture he had watched other people make and never once been allowed to try. Then he stepped back and looked at me wearing his coat as if he had proven something to himself. "I will be an hour," he said. "Do not let Haruki give you his food. He needs it more than he thinks." And that, more than the laugh, was when I understood he was going to be all right. Whatever happened in that room, because a tool does not worry about whether someone else eats. Only a person does that. I do not have the standing to tell you what happened in the grand room. I was not there. My scene was the equipment room, and the corridor, and the waiting. Power confronts power, and I am not power. And the master rule of this place, the one the director never understood, was that knowing your scene is the only thing that keeps you alive long enough to change the story. But I know the shape of it, because Renjiro told me after, in the flat, complete way he tells things, leaving out everything about himself and somehow saying all of it anyway. He walked into the grand room while the storm threw itself against the windows. He stood where the director could see his hands, out of 11 years of habit, and then, deliberately, he put his hands in his pockets, which I am told was the single most insubordinate thing the director had seen in 3 decades, because it meant the enforcer no longer cared whether he looked like a threat. He told the director that he quit. Not the job, the ownership. He told the man who had raised him as a weapon that the weapon was laying itself down, that there was no version of the future in which Renjiro lifted a hand for the organization again, that the director could bury him under the road if he liked, but he would be burying a free man, and that a free man's death is loud, is investigated, is the kind of thing that brings the wrong attention to a $40 million operation in a valley that only works if no one looks at it. It was, I realized when he told me, the most elegant thing either of us did. The director's whole power was tidiness, quiet stares, concluded investigations, things that do not get looked at. And Renjiro had made himself the one thing such a man cannot afford, a loose end too large and too public to tie off quietly, impossible to own, and expensive to kill in the same breath. Faced with a cost that high and a benefit that low, the director did what men like him always do. He recalculated. He decided the destabilizing influence and his broken enforcer were cheaper to release than to bury, and he wrote us out of his story as he had written so many people out before, with a shrug and a redirected budget. We were not worth killing anymore. Not because we were nothing, because we had made ourselves into a question he could not afford to answer. The director left on his black snowmobile the morning the storm broke, and he did not look at me, and he did not look at Renjiro, and that not looking was the sweetest thing I have ever been given, because it was the sound of a story closing its book on us and choosing, at last, to forget. I had wanted to be forgotten my whole life. I had built 2 lifetimes around it. I got it too, the forgetting, the safe gray invisibility, and it turned out to be worth having only because I was not alone inside it. The road opened in spring, exactly as promised. We walked down it together, Renjiro and I, with 2 envelopes now, instead of 1, because Sato on the last morning had pressed a second set of papers into Renjiro's hands with his gray, careful face, doing something it had not done in 19 years, which was hope. I never went down the road, he told us. Somebody should. Make it worth my watching. And he stayed, because some people are the watcher and not the one who leaves, and I understood him. And I was grateful, and I told him so, which I would not have been able to do in my first life, because in my first life I did not know how to tell anyone they mattered, and now I did, because a man who showed feeling only through logistics had taught me, without meaning to, that the things you do are the things you mean. The orbit saw us off. They were allowed to now. Makoto delivered a final threat assessment, which consisted of him listing every danger on the road to Nagano in a voice thick with the things he could not say, and I told him I would be careful, and he looked like I had handed him a future, and I let him. The Mori twins gave me a thermos of the terrible coffee, both of them. 1 thermos, the only thing they had ever agreed on. Kenji gave me a blanket. It was a very nice blanket. I still have it. Haruki walked us to the bottom of the road, further than he was supposed to because he had never once in his life done what he was supposed to, which was, I had come to understand, his best quality, and the reason the author had marked him for tragedy, and the reason I intended to write him a different ending. At the last bend, where he was meant to turn back, he did not turn back. He stood in the snow with his hands jammed in his pockets, and his 2 old eyes working at something he could not get out. And finally he said, "In the book. You said there was a book. Was I? Did I?" He stopped, started again. Was I supposed to be the one who? Yes, I said. There was no point lying to him. He had earned the truth, and he would have smelled the lie anyway. In the book, You were the one who put me down those stairs. Chapter 3. He took that the way he took everything, without flinching, a boy who had been handed worse things than this and kept standing. Then he looked at the chair I was not carrying, the one I had promised to keep, and something eased in his face that I had never seen ease before. I saved you a seat instead, he said. You did. First one anybody ever saved me. I held out my hand and he stared at it like he was not sure the gesture was allowed, and then he shook it. Once, hard, the handshake of a young man who had only ever been taught to do harm with that hand and was trying clumsily to learn another use for it. Come find us when the trouble gets too big, Haruki. I mean it. The chair is real. He had a long life ahead of him and a great deal of trouble in it, and I had told him where to find us in the gray, ordinary town at the bottom of the valley when the trouble got to be too much. I think he will come. I am keeping a chair for him. I have learned finally that keeping a chair for someone is not nothing. It is, in fact, very close to everything. At the bottom of the road, where the snow gave way to mud and the mud gave way to a real road with a real town at the end of it, Renjiro stopped and looked back up at the valley one last time, at the place that had made him and owned him and nearly killed us both. I do not know how to do this, he said. Any of it. A town. A life. Being a person who is not pointed at anything. His hands were at his sides, fingers curling, the only tell. I have no training for it. Good news, I said. I'm a teacher. And there, finally, in the mud at the bottom of the road, with the valley behind us and a small, gray, ordinary, terrifying life ahead, he reached out, and it was not a drill, and nothing in the world was watching to disapprove, and he took my face in both his hands and kissed me. And our scents caught at last, the struck match finally finding its fire, sharp and warm and entirely ours, and I stopped noticing things, which I had never once done in either life, because for the first time there was nothing I needed to watch for. We found a town. It was not much of a town. It had a diner with coffee almost as bad as the compounds, which we both found unreasonably comforting, and a school that needed a teacher, and a quiet that we filled slowly with a life. I teach now, real teaching, the kind that reaches the children the day school cannot, and I am better at it than I have ever been, because I am no longer trying to be forgotten, and a teacher who wants to be remembered is a dangerous and wonderful thing. Renjiro learned to be a person who was not pointed at anything. It took time. On the nights the stillness came over him, and I knew he was back in the box where they told him what he was. I did not fix it with logistics. I just put my hand flat on his chest over the burnt sugar sweetness and let him feel that someone had knelt down in front of him and stayed. He works with his hands now. The whole town brings him their broken machines, and he mends them. And I have watched grown men weep over a repaired furnace, because a thing everyone assumed was good for one purpose, turning out to be good at care, instead is the kind of miracle that makes people cry without knowing the reason. He is terrible at incident reports. He never improved. The one form I ever made him fill out, he completed so badly that I keep it in a drawer, and sometimes I take it out and laugh. And it is not the wrong thing to laugh at. It has never once been the wrong thing. I died at a desk in a life where I was useful to everyone and loved by no one, and I woke up in a book that had already decided to throw me away, and the book was wrong. The books are always wrong about the people they throw away. The throwaway notice things. The tool that was built to die learned to mend, and the two men who were each supposed to matter to no one matter now, enormously, to exactly one person each, which I have come to believe is the only number that was ever going to be enough. The chair at our table is still there for Haruki. The blanket is on the bed. The coffee is bad. The man across from me is reading with his glasses pushed up on his forehead, and when he catches me watching him, he does not ask why, because I taught him that the things you do are the things you mean, and I am watching him because I can, because no one is ever going to take him down a stairwell, because for the first time in 2 lives there is nothing I need to watch for, and I am watching him anyway, on purpose, because I want to. The end. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed the story, tell me your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear from you.